Eric said, Phil, I love you, but we're bored of you. You're winning all the time.
In 1990, a factory worker walked into a world championship as a 125-to-1 underdog. Weeks later, he walked out a world champion after taking down his own mentor. That man was Phil Taylor. What came next would change darts forever. Because this wasn't just about winning trophies. It was about domination, perfection, and a few moments that left even his biggest fans stunned. Before Phil Taylor ever touched a world championship stage, he was just another working man from Stoke-on-Trent. A factory worker, earning barely enough to scrape by, spending his evenings at the pub, not chasing fame, just trying to unwind. But inside those smoky rooms, something was building. He didn't look like an athlete, didn't talk like one either. Yet when he picked up a dart, people stopped to watch. There was precision, calm, something different. Back then, darts was dominated by legends like Eric Bristow, the crafty Cockney, a showman, loud, confident, untouchable. Bristow wasn't just the face of darts, he was the standard everyone measured themselves against. But fate had other plans. One night, Bristow spotted the quiet kid with the steady hand. He took Taylor under his wing, sponsoring him, coaching him, showing him what it really took to win. No one thought much of it at the time. It was like a master training a student, nothing more. Until 1990. That year, everything changed. Taylor qualified for the BDO World Championship, and the odds couldn't have been worse, 125-to-1. Nobody expected him to make it out of the first round, let alone reach the final, but match by match, he dismantled the competition. Calm, focused, emotionless. Every throw was sharp, deliberate, almost surgical. By the time he reached the final, people were paying attention, and who was waiting for him there? His own mentor, Eric Bristow. It was the classic story no one saw coming, the teacher versus the student. But this wasn't supposed to be close. Bristow was a 5-time world champion. Taylor was the nobody he once sponsored. Yet from the first leg, something felt off. Bristow wasn't dictating the pace, Taylor was. He played like a man who had nothing to lose, and that's the most dangerous kind. One leg turned into two. Two turned into 6, and before the crowd could process it, Taylor had done the impossible. He crushed his own mentor 6-1. The underdog had destroyed the master. The audience was stunned. It wasn't just an upset, it was a power shift. A new king had arrived, and even Bristow knew it. After the match, Taylor was humble as always, almost awkward in victory, while Bristow admitted he'd created a monster. That line would follow Taylor for decades, because it wasn't just a joke, it was a prophecy. But legends aren't made in one moment. Taylor's story could have ended right there, a lucky run, a one-time fluke. Instead, he doubled down. The following years proved that 1990 wasn't an accident. By 1992, he was back on the world stage, and this time, the pressure was different. People expected him to win. In the final, he faced Mike Gregory, and what happened next was one of the most intense matches in darts history. Gregory had the title in his hand, 6 darts to win, but every throw missed by inches. Taylor clawed his way back, leg by leg, until the match reached a sudden death decider. One final dart, one perfect shot, and Taylor landed it. The room erupted. From a factory worker to a 2-time world champion in just 2 years. But what made it more unbelievable was how he handled it. No arrogance, no theatrics, just pure focus. He wasn't chasing attention, he was chasing perfection, and the world was starting to realize Phil Taylor wasn't just another champion. He was building something bigger, something that would soon make every other player look ordinary. But that was just the beginning. Because after those first world titles, the power didn't just win, he dominated. By the mid-1990s, Phil Taylor wasn't just winning, he was rewriting what winning meant. The sport was changing, and so was he. When the Professional Darts Corporation, PDC, split from the BDO, Taylor made the move. Many doubted it. New organization, new rules, smaller stages. But Taylor saw something bigger, a future, a place where darts could grow and where he could become untouchable. From 1995 to 2002, Phil Taylor went on a run that looked impossible even on paper. 8 straight world titles. No flukes, no lucky draws. Just relentless precision, match after match, year after year. His average scores were higher than anyone had ever seen, his finishes clinical, his focus unbreakable. His rivals knew what was coming, but still couldn't stop it. Players like Dennis Priestley, Peter Everson, and Rod Harrington were all world-class until they stood across from Taylor. He didn't just beat them, he dismantled them. Some walked off the stage looking shell-shocked, like they just faced something not entirely human. He had this eerie composure, no trash talk, no emotion, just efficiency. Every leg looked the same, treble 20, treble 20, treble 20, finish. It became routine, and that's what scared people most. Darts, once unpredictable, had turned into a one-man show. Commentators started calling him the Machine. Others called him the Power. Both were true. But Taylor's dominance didn't make him careless, it made him obsessed. He studied his own matches like an engineer taking apart a machine he'd already built. He'd win a title, then go home and practice for 6 hours a day. He said once, "You stop improving the moment you think you're good enough." And that's exactly why no one could catch him. In 2002, he reached a peak that even he might not have imagined. That year's World Championship final wasn't close. He destroyed Peter Manley 7-0, one of the most brutal whitewashes in darts history. The crowd gasped at the scoreline. Manley stormed off the stage without shaking Taylor's hand, sparking one of darts' most famous rivalries. The handshake snub became iconic. Manley furious, Taylor unbothered. He just smiled and said, "You've got to shake the winner's hand." That wasn't arrogance, it was control. Taylor wasn't trying to humiliate people, he just couldn't stop winning. By then, Taylor had built more than a career, he'd built a myth. And the pressure that came with it was enormous. Every player wanted to be the one to finally take him down. Every match felt like a test of whether the legend could still be beaten, but no one could break through. The 2002 season didn't just end with a trophy, it ended with history. At the World Match Play in Blackpool, Taylor threw the first ever live televised 9-dart finish. A perfect leg, caught on camera, that sent the crowd into chaos. Commentators lost their minds. Taylor just grinned, calm as ever, as if it was another day at the office. That 9-darter wasn't just a moment, it was a message. Even perfection wasn't out of reach anymore. From 1995 to 2002, Taylor wasn't competing, he was building an empire. And by the end of it, the question wasn't who could beat him, it was whether anyone ever would. But as his streak continued, a new challenger was rising in another corner of the darts world. A player with raw power, composure, and a fan base big enough to rival Taylor's, someone who wasn't afraid of him. And soon, their collision would become one of the greatest rivalries the sport had ever seen. While Taylor was busy crushing everyone in the PDC, a storm was brewing elsewhere. In the BDO, the rival darts organization, a Dutchman named Raymond van Barneveld was rewriting his own kind of history. Smooth, composed, deadly on doubles, and adored in the Netherlands, Barney had already become a national hero. To Dutch fans, he was their Phil Taylor, dominant, disciplined, and unshakable. For years, the two men existed in separate worlds, Taylor ruling the PDC, Barneveld the BDO. But fans everywhere kept asking the same question: what would happen if they ever faced each other? That question was finally answered in 2006, when Barneveld made the move to the PDC, and just like that, the fantasy matchup became real. It wasn't just a player switching organizations, it was a full-on invasion. The Dutch fans followed him, chanting his name, waving flags, turning every arena into a sea of orange. The energy changed overnight. Taylor, for the first time in years, felt a real threat on the horizon. This wasn't another underdog. Barneveld was a champion in his own right, a man who knew how to win under pressure. The two men respected each other deeply, but everyone knew this was about more than trophies. It was about who would own the modern era of darts. Then came the 2007 PDC World Championship final, the showdown fans had been dreaming about. It had everything: history, emotion, rivalry, and the two greatest players of their generation standing across from each other. Taylor came out firing. He raced to a 3-0 lead, and it looked like business as usual, another final, another Taylor masterclass. But then, the match turned. Barneveld found rhythm. He began hitting trebles with surgical precision, finishing like a man possessed. The crowd sensed it, this wasn't over. Slowly, the gap closed. 3, 1, then 4, 2, then 5-4. Taylor, once in total control, suddenly looked human. The energy in the building shifted. Every leg became war. When the score reached 6-6, the tension was unbearable. And then came the unthinkable sudden death. Both players stood on stage for one final leg to decide the world title. Taylor missed the bull with his opening dart. Barneveld, cool under the lights, asked the referee to leave Taylor's dart in the board and used it to deflect his own shot into the bull. The crowd erupted. He went on to win the leg, taking the match 7-6, and with it, his first PDC world title. The moment broke through the sport's ceiling. It wasn't just about who won, it was what it meant. For the first time in years, someone had stood toe-to-toe with Phil Taylor and refused to blink. The king had been beaten, but only just. Taylor, exhausted, admitted afterward that it was the best match he'd ever played in, even though he lost. He respected Barneveld, but the fire in his eyes said everything. This isn't over. That final didn't end Taylor's reign, it ignited a rivalry that carried darts into a new golden age. Every time they met afterward, arenas sold out, every rematch felt personal, and every dart they threw reminded fans why they fell in love with the sport in the first place. The loss hurt Taylor deeply, but it also lit a fuse. Because what came next would prove that even when pushed to the edge, the power still had plenty left to give. When Phil Taylor walked off that stage in 2007 after losing to Raymond van Barneveld, you could see it in his face, the shock, the disbelief, the frustration. For the first time in over a decade, he'd been beaten on dart's biggest stage, and for Taylor, that wasn't just a loss, it was a challenge. He went home and did what he always did when things went wrong. He worked hours a day on the practice board, rebuilding his throw, refining his rhythm. He changed equipment, adjusted his grip, even altered his stance to get an extra millimeter of precision. The next time fans saw him on TV, he looked sharper, leaner, and somehow even more focused. By 2009, Taylor wasn't just back, he was terrifying. The whole season felt like a statement. And when the draw for the 2009 World Championship final came out, fate did its thing. Phil Taylor versus Raymond van Barneveld, the rematch. This time, there were no comebacks, no sudden death. Taylor dominated from the first dart, every treble hit, every finish landed. Barney fought hard, but he was drowning in a storm. The final score, 7-1. Taylor's average, 110.94, one of the highest ever in a world final. It wasn't just a victory, it was revenge served ice cold. He didn't taunt, didn't boast. He simply nodded and walked off like it was business as usual. That was Taylor's way. When others shouted, he just kept scoring. But if 2009 was about redemption, 2010 was about perfection. The Premier League final that year is still one of the most jaw-dropping performances ever televised. Taylor faced James Wade, a talented, confident player who'd beaten almost everyone else. In the early legs, Taylor looked calm but focused. Then something unreal happened. 9 perfect darts. The crowd exploded. Wade looked stunned. Commentators were screaming, but Taylor wasn't done. Minutes later, he did it again. 2 9-dart finishes in a single televised final. No one in darts history had done it before, and no one's done it since. He went on to win the title, of course, because how could he not? But the score almost didn't matter anymore. The image of him hitting back-to-back perfection became the stuff of legend. In that moment, Phil Taylor didn't just win another trophy. He showed the world what mastery looks like when talent, obsession, and pressure all align. From his 2007 heartbreak to that double 9-darter, he'd proven one thing: you can knock the power down, but you'll never keep him there. And just when fans thought they'd seen it all, he pulled off one more chapter that made even perfection look routine. After 2 decades of dominance, most athletes slow down. Taylor didn't, he couldn't. Winning had become muscle memory. But the sport around him was changing. New stars were rising: Michael van Gerwen, Gary Anderson, Peter Wright, players who'd grown up idolizing him and were now ready to take him on. The 2013 World Championship felt like a crossroads. Taylor had nothing left to prove, but plenty left to defend. The semi-final was explosive. Taylor versus van Barneveld, again. The rivalry still burned hot. Taylor won 6-4, but at the end, tensions flared: an awkward handshake, sharp words, and a near confrontation before security stepped in. The next day, Taylor apologized, calling it heat of the moment, but fans knew what it really meant. Even after all those years, beating Barney still mattered. Then came the final. Taylor versus Michael Van Gerwen, the young phenom who just started taking over the sport. The crowd was split, the energy was electric. Van Gerwen led early, but Taylor refused to fold. Leg by leg, he clawed his way back, flipping the script one last time. When the final double hit, Taylor threw his arms wide, roaring as the crowd erupted. 7-4, his 16th world title, the last of his career. That win wasn't just another trophy. It was proof that even in an era shifting beneath him, the power still burned bright enough to outshine everyone else. But the story didn't quite end there. In 2017, Blackpool's Winter Gardens hosted what would become Taylor's last great performance, the World Match Play. He stormed through the field like it was 1,999 again, crushing the reigning champion Michael Van Gerwen 16-6, then dismantling Peter Wright 18-8 inches the final. The crowd knew they were watching history. When Taylor lifted the trophy, he smiled that calm, almost shy grin as if he knew this was the last time. That night was pure poetry, not a comeback, not a fluke, just one more masterclass to remind everyone who started it all. A few months later, he announced his retirement after the 2018 World Championship, closing a 30-year career that transformed a pub game into a global sport. 16 world titles, over 200 tournaments, countless perfect legs, and an army of rivals who all admit the same thing: no one will ever do it like Phil Taylor again, because his biggest wins weren't just about numbers. They were the nights when perfection met pressure, and the power showed up one more time. When Phil Taylor threw his final dart on the professional stage, it wasn't just the end of a career, it was the end of an era. 3 decades, 16 world titles, over 200 professional wins. Numbers like that don't even sound real anymore. They're not stats, they're folklore. But what made Taylor's legacy so powerful wasn't just how often he won, it was how he won. The man didn't rely on theatrics or showmanship. He didn't need to. His dominance came from silence, from focus, from walking up to the oche and making the impossible look effortless. In every sport, there's a figure who doesn't just play the game, but changes it. Jordan, Federer, Woods. In darts, it was Taylor. Before him, darts was still seen by many as a pub pastime, a working man's game played in smoky bars. After him, it was arena lights, broadcast deals, sponsorships, and sold-out crowds around the world. Taylor turned darts into spectacle. Ask any top player today, Michael Van Gerwen, Peter Wright, Luke Humphries, Gerwyn Price, and they'll all say the same thing. Without Phil Taylor, none of this exists. He was the blueprint. The one they all studied, the one they all measured themselves against. Even his rivals will admit it. Raymond van Barneveld said it best years later. When Phil played his best, the rest of us were just fighting for second. And he was right. Taylor set the standard so high that even perfection started to look ordinary. But Taylor's true impact went beyond trophies and averages. He gave darts a face, a legacy that drew in millions who had never watched a match before. His presence alone made the sport feel bigger, more serious, more alive. And what's most incredible is that even after retirement, his shadow still hangs over every stage. Every time someone throws a 9-darter or lifts a trophy, there's one unspoken question in the crowd's mind. Yeah, but could he have beaten Taylor? That's the kind of legacy you can't buy. You can't fake, you can only earn it, one dart at a time. But the story doesn't quite end there, because a new generation is already chasing that shadow. Every legend leaves behind 2 things: memories and a target. For today's players, Phil Taylor's records aren't just history, they're goals. 16 world titles, 214 tournament wins, career averages that still stand tall decades later. And now, the next wave is coming for them. At the front of that charge is Luke Littler, a teenager from Warrington who's already breaking scoring records and dismantling veterans with the same fearless precision Taylor once had. When asked about Taylor, Littler said, "He's the reason I started playing." And you can see it in his style, calm, confident, unshaken. It's almost poetic, the new generation chasing the old master, like history looping back on itself. The same way Taylor once dethroned his mentor Eric Bristow, young players now chase him. That's how greatness survives, by creating more of it. And that's Phil Taylor's biggest win of all. It wasn't the titles, the trophies, or even the perfect legs. It was what came after the legacy of players he inspired, the crowds he built, the sport he elevated. He didn't just dominate darts, he defined it. Because long after the lights fade, long after the trophies gather dust, people will still talk about that factory worker from Stoke-on-Trent, the man who walked onto a stage no one thought he belonged on, and never stopped winning. Phil "The Power" Taylor. 16-time world champion, the greatest to ever throw a dart, and maybe, just maybe, the only player whose biggest win was changing the game forever.